What's up, STS Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Surviving the Survivor. It is hard to believe it's been 40 days, no murder suspect, no person of interest named, and no murder weapon to be found anywhere. Here tonight to break this down, two more phenomenal guests. That's what we do here at STS. We bring in great guests, and tonight, as I said, no exception. The woman that you're looking at is Angenette Levy. She is a correspondent and host for the Law and Crime Network and has covered a number of high-profile criminal cases in both state and federal courts throughout her career, including the trials of Steven Avery, of Netflix fame, Brooke, Skylar, Richardson, and most recently, the trials of Kyle Rittenhouse and former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. The man with the goatee is Troy Lambert, a freelance writer. He looks like a writer and acts like a writer, so he is a writer. He's a mystery author, which is interesting considering what we're about to discuss. A multi-genre editor and nonfiction author, as well as a ghostwriter. Troy has a wealth of experience and knowledge, especially about the area in and around Moscow, as he lives in Idaho himself, in Payette, which I just learned how to spell. And he also writes for Unbound Northwest, and he is the author of the wildly popular Max Boucher Murder Mystery series. And I asked Troy just off the cuff, asked him how many books he's written. I expected him to say 7 or so. He has written 30 books, which is absolutely insane. So quite a feat. Some quick housekeeping notes. You can listen to us because people have asked anywhere podcasts are found, not just on YouTube. If you want to be part of the newsletter, drop your email in the comments section. We all could use your support at Patreon. Please follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And please hit that like button. My 8-year-old keeps reminding me to tell you guys that because it helps, as she says, with the algorithm. Now, of course, these cases all become whodunits. And a lot of times we forget the victim's name. So I like to start each episode this way, which is, let us never forget those young lives lost way too soon. Madison Mogan, 21. Kaylee Gonzalez, 21. Zana Kernodal, 20. And Ethan Chapin, 20. And now on to the very, very little bit of news that there is coming out of Moscow right now. Brian Enton, who, for full disclosure, used to work with my wife and is a correspondent with News Nation and does a phenomenal job. He had an interview with the Moscow police chief, James Fry, just a few moments ago, and asked the police chief if he thought the killer was still in Idaho or somewhere far away. Of course, people like Troy are going to be concerned because he lives in Idaho. The chief's response to that, and I quote here, "We are not disclosing any of that. Some of that we just don't know at this point." He will have a full interview. By the time you see it, it will have been on Dan Abrams. Meanwhile, NBC News also reporting last night that Police Chief James Fry told NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt that the case is not going cold and denied that the victims' families are being, quote, left in the dark. So first off, to Angenette, you are the Law and Crime host. You come from a news background. Are you surprised that the chief is keeping things very close to the vest right now, not saying whether the potential suspect or suspects could still be in the Moscow or Idaho area?
Joel, I'm not surprised one bit that he's not putting a lot of information out there. I've covered cases where they do this, where they are, so-called whodunits. And I've actually covered a case where there were multiple victims killed in their beds at night, in the middle of the night as they slept. A case in Ohio. And they said nothing. I mean, they did press conferences and things. They asked the public for their assistance. They asked for tips and leads. But I think when you have a case that is a whodunit, you do have to be really careful with what you put out there. You're going to have information about the scene and about the crime that only the killer would know. So you can't have too much of that out there. And you just can't have a lot of information floating around because they may not know a whole lot. I mean, they know what they're getting in from the crime lab as far as the test results go. They know what they've been able to glean from the hundreds of interviews they've done and the video that they've been able to look at. But they claim even 40 days in that they don't have a suspect or suspects. So I think they are probably being pretty smart and not putting a lot of information out there, even though it frustrates all of us. I want to know all of it. I want to know everything they're doing and who they've talked to and what's been said and what the scene looks like. But that's just not how it should go when they're trying to piece together something like this, because they have to actually build a case. If they don't have an obvious or an immediate suspect, you're going to have to build that case. It's easy to make an arrest. It's much harder to get a conviction.
And that's a great point. And that's come up with a lot of investigators who we've spoken with. It's not just about solving the case, but it's about prosecuting it in the court of law. Troy, to you, I imagine you're relieved as an Idahoan. How do you say that? An
Idahoan.
I knew that didn't sound correct. My apologies to the great state of Idaho. But I'm sure you're relieved by the fact that they are not in any way suggesting this case is cold. In fact, investigators I've talked to say it is red hot right now.
Right. And I feel like when we were there, we were up in Moscow last week, a couple of weeks ago now, for my stepson's college graduation from U of I. And first of all, there's a strong police presence and federal presence there that are actually investigating. So you can tell that there's work going on. They're doing something. Now, the fact that they're not telling us what they're doing is to a certain extent frustrating, but also to a certain extent kind of comforting. Like, I want them to catch whoever this is. I don't want them to spook them in any way. I don't want them to give them any information that gives them the opportunity to run, disappear, so that we never really get any answers. Because I think the mood of the community at this point is more one of watchfulness and kind of a little more security conscious than Moscow might have been in the past. But at the same time, kind of in anticipation of, we want answers. We want to know what happened. And for a lot of parents, especially, why this happened. I mean, why a group of college students? That motive is probably one of the most haunting things for parents that I talked to that were in the area at the time, was just, why would this happen to a young group of college kids?
And Troy, I want to drill down a lot more on what it's like in Idaho right now, but just let's finish off some of the news that's making headlines. So CNN actually spoke to the father of Kaylee Gonzalez, Steve Gonzalez. He's been in the news quite a bit. And he tells CNN that he, quote unquote, has to believe that his daughter's killer will be caught. Now that, more than 5 weeks, we're going past 6 weeks with no arrests made. When asked if he believes police will find the killer, he responded again, yes, I have to believe it. I couldn't sleep if I thought basically otherwise. Angenette, Steve has gotten some criticism for being a little too vocal in the media, but at the same time, I think people have to understand, and you've covered these cases, that this is a grieving father, lost his beautiful daughter, and God only knows, the pain he's feeling right now.
And he has gotten a lot of criticism, and I'm not sure that's fair, because none of us know how we would react if this happened to us. I mean, can you imagine getting that news that, your daughter goes down to Moscow to show off her Range Rover to her friends? She's getting ready to graduate, getting ready to move on and move to Austin, Texas for this job. And, it was a last minute decision apparently for her to go down there. And then you get a call that she and her best friend, who's almost like a daughter to you as well, have been stabbed to death in their beds. And the other two victims, Ethan Chapin and Xana Kernodle, that they've been murdered as well. And you want answers yesterday. I mean, you want to know who did it, why. I mean, they want to know, but at the same time, I don't think anybody ever sat them down and said, look, we want to tell you what we know, but we just can't. And this is how this works. And I think that probably was a mistake if that didn't happen. I don't know for a fact that didn't happen, but none of us know how we would react. And I think that he is grieving, and he just is beside himself and distraught and inundated with people like me trying to get him to talk to him. And yeah, I mean, I think that he probably needed somebody to sit him down and try to calm him down a little bit. But I feel for that family and all of the families, because they've suffered a horrific loss, and it's been out in the public. And their right to demand answers and their right to demand information. But I think that somebody needs to sit them down and say, look, this is how these investigations work, and it stinks, but this is how it goes.
From one journalist to another, I can tell you it's nice to have you on. We've had a lot of investigators on. The media, it is a tricky job. I've had Professor Steve Smith from the University of Idaho talks about media ethics and the challenges of speaking to parents at a time like this. But it is the media's responsibility to try to get information, and a lot of times loggerheads with police department and families, and it's a tenuous situation to say the least. So kudos to you for doing some hard work as well. Troy, you're in a place called Payette. How far is it from Moscow? And tell me, what is the mood like in forget Moscow for a minute, but Payette itself? Are people, is this the only thing people in town are talking about?
Not necessarily. I mean, it was a statewide, everybody was talking about it. It's still in the news, like pretty much on a daily basis statewide, because people want to know what happened. But it's not, because we're about 4 hours from Moscow, and it's a very different environment. I'm in a very small town. We don't have a college here. It's a relatively small and isolated area. And it's also kind of a different atmosphere. Moscow is very much a university town, and we're very much an agricultural and more of a typical small town. So we don't worry as much. Our crime statistics in this town are almost none, pretty much.
Our neighbors now, I mean, it's Idaho, which is different than New Jersey, where I grew up, and definitely different than Miami, where I live right now. Have you heard, are more people arming themselves, keeping a firearm by their bed, perhaps, just because you don't know who might be lurking?
Well, I don't think in Payette itself. And part of the reason for that is this is because of the nature of where we live. It's a very conservative area for the most part. For instance, for us, I have a rather large German Shepherd who would be happy to greet you if he came through my window at night. And I would be close behind him with some additional welcoming words for you as you attempted to enter my home. And that's kind of the way it is in a small town, especially in an agricultural area. A lot of people were already armed. It's kind of this is a hunting community. So it's not like the reason people own weapons here is not the same reasons you would own one in New Jersey or Miami, for example. It's a hunting community. People own firearms anyway. Moscow is much different because of it being a university area. So for us, for our area, that's one of the reasons that crime just isn't as much of a worry, because being armed and being prepared for someone to come in is a fairly routine thing. Plus, the majority of your neighbors. We haven't even been here that long. We know the majority of our neighbors, and all of us have dogs. And, it'd be a very difficult thing to target this neighborhood. Is what I would basically say. So that's kind of the atmosphere that's here anyway.
And when you first heard about it being a knife as the weapon used, or fixed blade instrument, did that surprise you, or did you just say, well, this is Idaho, a lot of people carry knives?
It surprised me so here's what surprised me initially. First of all, the fact that a murder happened in Moscow, Idaho at all. The crime rate in Idaho itself overall is relatively low. And most of that crime is situated in population centers like Boise or around the Coeur d'Alene and Post Falls area, and maybe areas around Caldwell where there might be gangs. So there's not, we don't have murders in Idaho. And when we do, they're the typical murders of a passionate murder. A husband murdered his wife, and then when the police get there, he's sitting on the stoop already crying because he feels sorry for it. And he says, she's in there, I'm sorry. And that's how quickly the murder is solved. So other than gang activity and stuff like that in population centers, we just don't have murders in Idaho. And one of the reasons is in rural Idaho, you're armed because I'm worried about raccoons and critters. So if people came along, we still have, the things that are available to us. So it's just surprised me that it happened in Moscow at all. Especially it surprised me that it happened in that particular area because it's a super dense, like there are a lot of students in that area. There are several apartment complexes, several rental homes, and they're like stacked almost on top of each other. I was surprised when we went up there at how close all of the different buildings were and how many students were packed in that small of an area. So I was surprised that someone would do that in that area because it's really densely populated. It seems like an area where there's lots of students and they're active all the time.
And can I add to that, Joel?
100%.
I was up there a couple of weeks ago, actually, and I was also surprised at how densely populated it is. It's one thing to look at it on a map. It's another to stand there by the house and see just how close everything is. And I talked to a neighbor who lives directly across the street from the house, and he told me, look, if you heard a noise late at night, say I heard a scream, I wouldn't have thought anything of it because it was a weekend night. Kids are out partying or what have you. And it's just a party area. And he said, it's loud a lot around there. And there's a lot of foot traffic all the time. So it is densely populated. And it is pretty surprising. And that's why I think, this is my feeling, is that whoever got in that house had to have been familiar with the house to go in there the way they did and do what they did. I feel like that person would have to know the layout. Just my personal opinion.
And when you were there, Angenette, how would you rate the fear factor in Moscow? Obviously, I guess the initial shock was over, but
Right.
is there a heightened sense of fear or alarm?
I was out on campus and I was trying to talk to students. A lot of them wouldn't talk to me, especially the women, the female students. But a lot, at that point in time, probably half the students had already gone home and they were going to finish their exams online. So, but some of them weren't. They felt like, the Idaho State Police had state troopers patrolling around. The university was taking measures to keep them safe. It was dark out. It gets dark there at like 4:30, 4:45, something like that. And we were out there at like 5:36 at night and it's dark. And kids were still walking around. Students were walking around campus, some alone, and some were females walking alone. So I think the initial shock had worn off. My sense is that people, they want to know who did it and they want to be able to move on because there's a lot of frustration too. I had one business owner specifically say to me when I asked him about this, he was really upset with the press, the media. He felt like the national media was kind of invading their small community and making it look bad. And he said to me, I'm not sure this community has the patience for what it's going to take to solve this. And that to me was like a stunning statement because I thought to myself, wow, if that's the sentiment there, yeah. So I think there are some people who are kind of on edge, but at the same time, it seemed like in a lot of ways life was going on.
I totally get the frustration. I'm a big advocate, as is Dan Abrams, who owns Law and Crime, of law enforcement, and I tend to think that they're gonna have the resolve. They're gonna figure this out. It might take some more time, but I believe that to be the case. A little bit more news, something we discussed, but just to kind of reiterate, Troy, now that I have you on this panel, classes are going to resume at the University of Idaho on January 11th. Now, what's interesting is they say that they're adding more security on campus. They're distributing Birdie personal safety alarms. They're offering self-defense workshops and stalking awareness education, among other safety measures. Do you think that helps, Troy?
I think it helps for people's peace of mind. Quite honestly, there were a lot of the female students who, so fortunately, like our stepson was graduating and he's not going back. Like he's not returning to class. He graduated, he's done. And a lot of the graduates, I think, felt a huge sense of relief that they didn't have to go back. So I think for those students that do return to campus, you're going to have to offer them something that gives them the feeling of more control. Now, whether any of those things would have helped this situation, this particular situation, is a really good question. But to raise awareness, because part of it is in that area. So my stepson lived in that area, lived in the apartment complex that's sort of right next to the house. And a lot of times they didn't even lock their door. Him and his roommate didn't even lock their door because, well, somebody might want to come in that they knew and they might not hear them. They're both gamers. They're in their headphones, stuff like that. They might not hear them. And somebody might want to come in. So they left the door unlocked. My wife, who's from Chicago, she's like, after we went up there for the graduation, she's like, lock that door as soon as we leave, right behind us. Don't, she's the security conscious one. But many of those students were leaving their doors unlocked for that reason. People wandered in and out of each other's apartments and houses in that area. And I think that has definitely changed. And I think that attitude of let's do some things to be proactive, those personal alarms, the stalking for sure, I think is something that's like, I think a lot of people believe this was a stalker, someone who targeted one of the girls, more than likely. And so that kind of training is a good thing anyway, and probably something students should have had all along. And self-defense courses, in my mind, are never a bad thing to have, especially for women's self-defense. It's super important to be able to know what to do in a situation, if nothing else, than to escape. So I think it'll help people's peace of mind, but I also think it's really helpful in that if there is someone still out there, that they know that there's a raised awareness and a raised level of security on campus, and that students are paying attention to that, and so is the administration.
And that's why my two girls and my little boy are all taking jujitsu so they can defend themselves.
I mean, no kidding.
Yeah. Good thing. It's the #1 anti-rape defense system, by the way. So I encourage the martial arts. I'm curious, Troy, was that at this recent winter graduation where your stepson graduated? And if so,
Yes.
what was the mood like at graduation? What was your stepson's attitude towards all this?
Well, it was interesting because his girlfriend knew a couple of the girls there kind of tangentially, like they didn't know them really well, but they had been in that house at parties in that house, partly because they'd been so close. And the attitude at graduation was kind of a somber one, like kind of the moments when it should have been a very celebratory graduation. It still was to a certain extent. But there was a song and kind of a moment of silence for the kids who had passed. And there were a lot of tears during that time by a lot of the students who knew those people, those kids. I mean, they were out there, they were part of the party scene, and a lot of people knew them. So there was a lot of grief that kind of overlaid that whole graduation ceremony. And I think there was a certain amount of relief as the ceremony let out. You could see some people that were they were ready to go. And there were some students that didn't come back and walk. They finished their classes online and they didn't come back and walk for winter graduation, which is somewhat common anyway. Not everybody in winter graduation walks. But I think there were some students who stayed away deliberately because it was just too fresh. It was just too kind of in your face. And for my stepson's brother and for his girlfriend's dad, who came with us as well, like we're standing at their apartment and we're looking and we can see this house, and he's going, it's right there. Like it's right there. And that was an emotional moment for him to realize his daughter and, our stepson were that close to those people and to that house on the night that it happened. I mean, our stepson was at work that night, came home and started playing games. I mean, he was probably 150 yards away when this was happening. So the attitude was just it's very fresh. It was still very raw. I think it still is very raw with a lot of different students. Some of them are avoiding listening to the media because they don't want to hear about it until somebody gets caught.
It's strange. As you were speaking, I cannot tell you how many big cases I've covered where people are murdered or killed or a terror attack, and you always see like the flowers and they always call it the makeshift memorial. I don't recall seeing anything. I don't know if that's because they're really preserving the crime scene. Did you happen to notice a memorial in town when you were there?
I think there was one on the university campus, but there is not one at the house. And I think it is because they're preserving the crime scene. There are officers there every day. Like every day when we drove by, there are officers there. And there were a couple different times there were FBI vehicles there as well, parked at the house. Still crime scene tape all around it, that type of thing. So I think they're definitely preserving that crime scene. I don't I mean, I don't know how long they need to actually gather the evidence there, but I also understand that the desire not to let that be contaminated at all. So it's very cordoned off, very. You have to stay a certain distance away. You can only get so close.
I'm going to get to viewer comments as I always do, but one interesting one that came in, which I'll throw over to Angenette. Someone also raised the point that, to the best of their knowledge, there is no reward. Have we heard anything about reward money for this? Because the implication in the comment was it's a college town. Maybe they're afraid to speak. Money talks, and maybe that would lure somebody out. So, Angenette, have we heard, do you know, about any kind of reward for the apprehension of the suspect?
No, and when I was in Idaho, I asked the PIO for the police department that, and he said basically that they're getting really good leads coming in, good tips. Back then, it was fewer than 10,000. We've crossed that threshold this week. They have now around 15,000 tips that they are going through, and imagine how long it will take to get through every one of those tips. So they feel that they've got good enough information coming in that they don't need to offer a reward at this point. This is what I was told. It sounds like the practice or the theory or whatever you want to call it is that, you know, you might put a reward out there and it's going to generate a lot of leads and tips that maybe aren't that worthwhile. So they just don't feel it's necessary at this point in time.
And what was your sense in dealing with the Moscow Police Department? And I don't know if you talked to other public information officers, PIOs, as we call them. What was your sense of the department's confidence, like their demeanor? Did they seem like they were on top of things? You know, we've got this. Or do they seem to you, compared to other cases that you've covered, inexperienced?
Well, the PIO I've been dealing with is from the Idaho State Police, and he's a former police officer. So he seemed to, at least, you know, he had his talking points down, obviously. I think this would be overwhelming for any police department, a quadruple homicide, a true whodunit. So I mean, I think the fact that they called in, I'm sure they are overwhelmed to a point. They're not going to come out and say that, but I think you would have to feel overwhelmed dealing with that. And with 15,000 tips coming in and thousands of videos and 22,000 white Hyundai Elantras and all of that. So, but they seem to, you know, it seems like they did the right things in some respects. They called in the FBI for assistance. They probably knew they were in over their heads, that they needed the help. They have the Idaho State Police there assisting as well. So, you know, they keep saying they're going to follow this through. They're going to see it through to the end. So, I mean, in some ways, I think they seem confident, but I don't know how I don't know how you could feel not a lot of pressure in this situation, because the public is basically standing there, or at least the media, the public, the parents are demanding all of these answers, and they want them quickly. And sometimes it just doesn't happen that way.
We recently had a retired NYPD detective named Dr. Alfred Titus on, and he covered, I think, 500 homicides in New York City. In that time, he had a triple homicide, never a quadruple homicide. And he says, look, it would be daunting for the NYPD. So let alone a town of 25 or 26,000 people. And I just want to be clear that we are in no way bashing the Moscow PD, because I think they are doing yeoman's work and are probably on top of it a lot more than we even know.
Right.
With that said, Troy, to you, Angenette earlier said she feels like the person knew the home, had to know the home. Have you given any thought to potential motive here or a profile? I know you're not a professional profiler, but you write murder mysteries. Have you given thought to who this possibly could be?
the only thing I can say is kind of the same thing. I believe they had to have been in the house and know the layout of the house to do to do this crime essentially in the way that they did. It feels very personal because of the level of violence that happened. So I believe it was someone and I'm like a lot of other people. I believe the word targeted is used like way overused and way too specifically because it makes it feel like this is someone who's just like this mastermind who targeted this. But it had to be someone who was at least somewhat familiar with basically how to get out of a crime scene without making a mess and just getting caught almost immediately. The average amateur who committed a crime like this would have blood all over, and they would it would be obvious to someone. They would tell someone. So it was someone who's organized, someone who knew what they're doing, and who, at a minimum, targeted that house. Probably targeted one of the people for some reason. But it's difficult to talk about with college kids. You're like, what enemies do they actually have? Well, a jealous boyfriend, something like that. Who knows what the possible motive would be? But it feels like it would be something personal, and that's it. It almost had to be with college students. Obviously, well, the motive wasn't robbery. The motive wasn't something else. So it feels like a very personal, and someone who was aiming specifically for that house at a minimum and had been there, knew the layout of the house. But anyone could have been there when they were having a party, even deliberately to scout the layout of the house. So it's very difficult to say with any certainty. Again, there would just be evidence. There would be, hundreds and fingerprints and all kinds of stuff to go through because it was a party house. So it'd be difficult to narrow that down. But on the motive side of things, it just feels like it would be a passionate type crime, but it had to be a very organized one.
And Angenette, to you, was there anything in your reporting or being out there that kind of led you to this conclusion that you think it's someone who knew the home? Who we just said we weren't going to use the word targeted, but targeted either one or more of these students?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because the police say, they believe it was targeted, but they don't know if it was the house or the people inside. And I find that to be somewhat astounding because I don't know why you would target the house per se. And I feel like to get in and out of there without, to commit such a violent crime. I mean, and when I say that, I mean, it's so personal. You have to get up close to somebody to stab someone. And they said some of these victims had defensive wounds. That could mean they did this or whatever. We just don't know. I feel like, how do you get in there? You murder 4 people by stabbing, and that there's not enough noise to rouse people who are downstairs, the 2 downstairs roommates in the lower level of the house. I just feel like, I mean, can you imagine going into a dark house in the middle of the night and carrying out something like this? I would think, with all the stairs too, if you've looked at any of the TikTok videos or the layouts of the house, I mean, it's like there's a set of stairs here, and there's so many different little sets of steps. I feel like you'd have to know your way around. That is my opinion. It means nothing. It's just from my viewing of the area, the scene, knowing how densely populated it is, and the entry points. You've got that front entry door, and then you've got the sliding glass door in the back. That's just my feeling about it. And you'd have to know maybe that it was going to be unlocked. And everybody around there, from what I have heard from the neighbors, kept their doors unlocked.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Troy, you are coincidentally, and I guess ironically, a murder mystery author, and you've done a lot of research on the psychology of killers as a result of your profession as a writer. Is there anything that's jumped out at you from your studies, either related to this or something that's of interest to you?
Well, it's just what really interests me about cases like this and kind of dealing with any true crime situation is for fiction to work, right? We have to have a crime that makes a certain amount of sense, because otherwise a reader won't believe that would happen. But like in this case, in a reality case, it doesn't necessarily have to make sense. Anything could have triggered someone to personally and brutally attack someone. given the proper mental state. But they had to have somebody that's mentally unstable and that had some kind of a planning. Now, whether they had experience killing in one way or another, that's the part that puzzles me to a certain extent. But this is like when we look at reality, like real crimes, almost anything could have triggered somebody and set them off. Normally, we need a strong motive in fiction. In real life, you don't really need that. But I still puzzle over the motive. That is the biggest thing that puzzles me about this whole case. But again, I'm the same way. I feel like they needed to know the house and they needed to be very organized with a very strong plan. Otherwise, how are you going to murder 4 people again, exactly like you said, with a knife and get in and out without making noise, without leaving a trace, without leaving clues of your own DNA and your own blood behind, especially in the case of defensive wounds? Like, it's very often that there's all kinds of different things that generally happen because of that. You slip down the knife blade, cut yourself a little bit, something like that. So it feels to me like this is someone with some kind of a mental. It had to be someone that was kind of disconnected from reality. It would seem to me, and that would be a logical psychological aspect of the killer.
And is it your sense that Idahoans, got it right that time, is it your sense that they feel like it's an isolated incident at this point and that the concern is not overwhelming?
Yeah, I would say that the majority of people that I talked to, the parents and stuff like that, felt like this is an isolated incident, in that because it feels like this was targeted, and because the police even said it's either the house or the kids that were targeted. And I'm like you, I can't believe that they would target the house. Like,
Right.
why would you just target that? It just doesn't make any sense to me. But if it's targeted at one of the specific victims, then I don't feel like this is someone who'd be out roaming around necessarily looking for another victim. And also, it's a quiet time at the college. I mean, it's the Christmas break now. As students start coming back to college, I think we might see that concern ramp up if we haven't seen any suspects and any major developments. Because parents, I mean, I would be concerned if our stepson was going back up there. I'd be like, okay, there's some behaviors I'd really like you to change. Like, please lock your door.
Right.
Some simple things like that you would think would be logical, but in a small town with no crime, the kids didn't even think about, right? So I think that those concerns will come up and will raise again if there's still no developments and kids are trickling back to school. I think that's going to change the attitude a bit.
And we're going to get to viewer questions and comments in a second. But Angenette, I'm just wondering again, from your being on the ground, boots on the ground, as they say, did you get a sense that, because right now, I know after Thanksgiving, something like 70% of the student population did not show back up. They don't have hard figures. Did you get the sense that students are going to continue to remain at home and not come back after the winter break, pending the solving of this case?
I didn't get that sense because everybody that we encountered was there. I didn't get the sense that they weren't going to come back. And there were so many students walking around. There were even, I was eating at a restaurant in downtown Moscow and just grabbing a quick lunch, and students there hanging out, doing what kids do, sitting there eating lunch, some of them working at the restaurant. So I didn't get that sense, at least for the ones that were there, that they wouldn't come back. But who knows? I mean, there may be parents who are saying to their kids, you are not going back there until they know who did this. Because they're, if you're not somebody who covers this kind of stuff, I mean, a lot of people think, oh, it's a serial killer. It could be a serial killer. Well, it could be. I think that's unlikely. But it could be. But I didn't get the sense that there was going to be a mass exodus. I think we just have to wait and see how that pans out. I'm sure the university wants this solved because, I mean, think about that. You're trying to attract people to your school and this happens.
And Angenette, as a reporter, you're not supposed to inject yourself into the story, but you're a young woman. You're on this campus. It's getting dark out at 4:30.
Thanks for calling me young. I appreciate that. You're a smart man.
I think you're definitely younger than Troy and me, so I think we're safe to say that.
I'll
But
take it. I'll take it.
how did you feel in Moscow during that time? Because I'll tell you right now, I would feel a little nervous.
Yeah, I have a pretty thick skin, and I've been in some pretty, covering things in inner city neighborhoods and things like that, covering crime there. But I'm not going to lie to you. As it got a little dark out, I mean, I'm not from there. I'm not familiar with the town. I literally was sent there to cover this, and I don't know my way around. I'm staying at a hotel. I'm with a photographer. We're out by ourselves, and I felt very comfortable with him. Obviously, there's safety in numbers. But I even said to him at one point in time when it was getting dark and it was around 6:30 or something, and I'm like, maybe we should just call it a night, because we don't know. How do we know the next person we approach for an interview is not going to be involved in this? Or, so I just thought, you know what, maybe we should just, pack it up for the night. We can try to get some interviews in the morning when it's light out, because, we have no idea who did this. And I always look at these things as you're a suspect until you're not. And you just don't know. I mean, this could be one person, or it could be a couple of people involved in this. I'm not saying more than one killer per se, but, there could be other people with knowledge of what happened, or even there for the ride that night.
We had two veteran law enforcement officers on the show 2 nights ago, and I just totally randomly asked them, they've got kids, just when they're out and about, especially with all the gun violence in the country right now. And it was so interesting to hear them talk. They say that at a restaurant, they will never sit with their back to the door. They're always taking a corner table.
Yeah.
When they go into a mall with their kids, they're always behind them. They're always armed. And sadly, this is the way people kind of have to live right now in this country. Hopefully it changes one day. But with that, let's get on to some viewer questions and comments. We've got a bunch of good ones here. The first one comes from Jules B. And I'll throw this one out to Angenette. Have they investigated all the teachers and professors or maintenance staff at the school? It's an interesting comment, because all we're hearing right now are students. There could for sure be a creepy professor or two on campus, or a maintenance person. Yeah. Do we know if authorities have questioned staff at the school or faculty?
I don't know that. They won't tell us who they've spoken to at all. They say they've done hundreds of interviews. You would think that they had spoken to some of these people. I mean, I can't imagine they went and interviewed every employee at the school. But I just can't. I wish I could answer that question. They won't tell us anything. I tried for like 25 minutes interviewing this PIO a couple of weeks ago, and I interviewed him yesterday too. So, they are very careful about what they say. And I think if they say certain things, they do it with a purpose. Like this whole thing about them being confident that the people in that Hyundai Elantra have information. So things like that. So I wish I could answer that question, but I just don't have a better answer for you.
And I think I'm so glad you're here, because it's a cat and mouse game always between the media and law enforcement, and it's a delicate balance, and it's a hard job on both ends. And people tend to bash both. So please don't do it. Next comment, Troy, this is for you. This comes from Sun Does Shine. Look at that optimism in the world. They write, and I'll tell you why I picked this comment. I saw a commenter write simply, "This wasn't a sloppy young college kid. It was committed by a class act." I felt like that was a really weird thing to say, and it was the killer not being able to keep quiet. The reason I bring it up, we had a very famous woman, Ann Burgess, on the podcast. She's worked with the original FBI Mindhunter. And another gentleman, Gary Bricado. And I found out someone stole my video and put it on their own YouTube channel, but that's a story for another time. But the reason I bring it up is Gary Bricado and Ann said, this killer is probably reading comments and probably writing comments.
Right.
So Troy, to you, What do you make of that this person used the term class act, if you make anything at all, especially since you're a guy that studies the psychology of killers?
Well, I would, first of all, I saw that show and that you did, and I totally agree with Ann and them, and that he is probably inserting himself in some form, probably making comments and things like that. Now, if it's the person that said this is a class act, I would really want to know what they mean by that. It's either somebody who's definitely sympathizing with the wrong side of this particular story, is what I would say. Because as much as we believe this killer was someone that was organized and that was sharp, this was probably not a sloppy student. That comment is probably absolutely right, and it was not a sloppy student. But to use the words class act raises some serious questions in my mind. Now, of course, I mean, this world of social media, anybody can create an account and, hop on and comment on stuff. So it's hard to say, but I would say if the killer is not watching these type of media things and commenting on them, I would be surprised if they're not watching that, because of that, the mentality of wanting to see the fruits of their labor. And that's a common thing with criminals. It's often why they return to the scene of the crime, different things like that. They want to see the fruits of their labor. I did this, and I want to see what the fallout and the outcome is.
And I will go out on a limb and say, under no circumstances is the term class act okay to use for a kill.
No.
Probably not.
Agreed.
Probably not.
Never.
Great phrase to turn. No. So the next comment, and Angenette, I'm curious to get your take on this, comes from Junior Banks. Great conversation and insights. I'm puzzled about the 6-hour window the university servers were down the night of the incident. I don't know if you're aware of this. This is news that kind of trickled out, but they say that the server, like kind of the main server, went down. And so surveillance cameras were out, computers were out at the time of this murder. Kind of judging by your reaction that you hadn't heard this, but do you make anything of it?
That's interesting you say that. I think I saw a blurb about something about the servers were down. So I have kind of heard that, but I don't know. That's really unfortunate if that's true, that the servers being down mean no surveillance cameras, because if you know where this house is, the University of Idaho is just kind of like not that far away. So if if somebody driving that way, passes through that way, on the way to the crime scene, you may not have those cameras. So I kind of had seen that, but not really looked into it that closely. But I will now be looking into it a little more closely. It could just be a weird coincidence. I just can't say.
And I actually just happened to do a show that's coming out next week that's super fascinating, related to all of this, with experts in digital forensics. And they said that is a very common time for servers to go down. It's a Saturday into a Sunday.
For servicing them or whatever.
Yeah. So it could be mere coincidence, but
I think my bank does that, the overnight hours, when it this, site won't be available for maintenance or whatever. So maybe it is.
Yeah. And it's usually, they say, on a Saturday into Sunday. So it could just be total coincidence. This one is more the sentiment for you, Troy. It comes from Leslie. This case is completely excruciating. It's so intense and horrific that trying to be festive and holiday-ish is tainted by all the sorrowful massacres that have occurred this year. We must solve this. You get the sense that is the feeling in Idaho and around the country right now. Maybe not, as far-reaching as Miami with the same effect, but in Idaho and Moscow specifically, you get the feeling that it doesn't feel like Christmas time right now.
I think there was a lot of that tone with the students, in that, not that it was like, let's cancel Christmas, but like, this is a lot more somber of a Christmas, and it doesn't feel quite the same. And I think that's definitely related to this happening that close to Christmas, that close to the holidays, because it's an odd time of college when you're ready to go home and celebrate with your families and take a break from campus and all of campus life. And then that's really been interrupted by these events. So I'm not surprised also that a large number of students didn't come back after Thanksgiving. First of all, if they have remote classes, a lot of them don't come back anyway. It's a very relatively short period of time, then you graduate. So some of them just don't bother to come back. But I feel like it definitely dampened the mood on campus, kind of that festive mood. And I could imagine that, especially if you were close to these kids, that you're just the fact that this even happened at that time at U of I would definitely dampen that Christmas spirit. So it's one of those things where it's hard to go, we're celebrating, but that's because our kids came home and their families can't celebrate because their kids did not come home.
Good point. Next comment from Vince. I think law enforcement absolutely has a few strong suspects. Takes time to stack that evidence. They're being watched, and this is why I picked this comment, like a stack of pancakes by a fat kid, meaning the perp or suspects. Angenette, in your gut of guts, do you think that law enforcement might know who it is and they're just getting the proper evidence at this point, or is that just too speculative?
I think it's too speculative. Maybe let's say they have a suspect. Are they really going to come out and tell us? I'm not so sure about that. So, I can't even imagine them saying, oh, we have a suspect and it's so and so. I mean, they're never going to do that. At least that's my opinion, that they will never do that. So it's possible they're looking at some people, but I mean, to hear them talk, they have nobody. I mean, when you interview them, they say they don't have any suspects, and they've talked about these people they don't believe are involved. The word cleared has been used. I think that's a strong word. Everything I've seen them say is that they don't believe this person is involved, at this time in the investigation. So, I mean, people you might not think are involved, could maybe later become a suspect. I just don't know. So I think it is too speculative at this point in time. They've had almost 6 weeks now. So I'd hope they were able to maybe get some test results in. We really don't know anything about this crime scene, what it was like inside. We have a lot of speculation about what it was like inside. And we don't know if the killer left anything behind that could be picked up with DNA analysis or something like that. So I think it is just too speculative. I would hope they were, narrowing a list, or maybe there are people they've indeed been able to actually clear, of those people that they don't believe are involved.
And I know you know this, and just a reminder, just because a suspect is cleared doesn't mean that law enforcement can't call them back and unclear them.
Right.
Yeah. This next comment is from Amy Hale, and this one, Troy, is for you because you're kind of our profiler for the evening by default, since you're a murder mystery writer and you study this stuff. So Amy writes, this killer, in my opinion, had a parasocial relationship with one or more of the victims. He was able to be a friend or boyfriend via the victim's social media accounts. It's a frightening but real concept. Do you think there's any potential validity to this commenter's assertion?
Maybe. I think that's pretty speculative as well, but I would say that they had to know them tangentially to have been in the house. But by know them in that sense, what I say is that's an extremely parasocial relationship, in that it could be at the very fringe of their group of friends or their group of acquaintances. So I don't think it had to be someone that was exceptionally close. And I would think from the psychology that this is probably someone who had difficulty making connections and making deep friendships and deep connections. More than likely, I mean, this is totally my opinion, but I think they would have someone that would find it difficult to make connections. So they may have wanted to make a connection with one of the victims and been unable to do so, unable to kind of cross that friendship barrier or whatever, or that acquaintanceship barrier even, to get closer to them. And that could be related to the motive, but I would think this would be someone who has difficulty making connections, more than likely.
Angenette, the next question comes from me off the top of my head right now. How often are you in touch with law enforcement in Moscow? And I know you're dealing with state police too, but are you trying to speak to them every day? And are you trying to reach out to family on a daily basis or people who are living in the community? And how tough has that been?
I mean, it's been tough.
Well, and we got her to freeze. Hopefully she will she's the first person to freeze on STS, but she will be back. I am confident.
Sorry about that, guys. I don't know what happened. I have no clue. But, I have tried to reach out to the Moscow police every day or every other day, just checking in to see if maybe there's an update. I try not to bug them too much because you want to be persistent and aggressive, but, you don't need to be emailing in 5 times a day if you've already touched base and nothing more is going to come out. I have tried to reach out to the family members, and some of them have made clear that they don't want to talk to us, and that's their right. I know that Steve Gonsalves has been out there, and I had spoken with him on the phone a couple of weeks ago, and I've interviewed his lawyer, so I've tried to kind of reach out to them again, but it's been difficult. I know they've get like 25 requests a day. That's what I've been told. So by the lawyer for the Gonsalves family. So I'm constantly trying to reach out to people, but it's a delicate balance, Joel, as you know. There's a fine line between being assertive and aggressive and just being kind of obnoxious. So I try to not be the obnoxious one. Politely aggressive is what I try to do.
A lot of reporters cross over to that obnoxious side.
Yeah.
I've been around them. This next comment comes from John Adams. Maybe it is the president resurrected here. And he writes, there is a trail that runs along that chain link fence that comes out on the road a short distance from the back of that house without going over that fence. So the killer didn't need a car and could have escaped without being seen at that time of night. You were there, Angenette. I don't know how closely you looked at the crime scene, but do you think there is a way the person could have snuck out? Because obviously, there's been a lot of talk about this Hyundai Elantra,
right.
The 2011 to 2013, the one they found in Eugene, I think led to nothing. But is it from what you saw, from your vantage point, does it appear like a killer could have gotten away on foot?
It's possible. I mean, it's entirely possible. I mean, there are a lot of places to go. We talked about how densely populated it is. So you could have gone on foot. I mean, there's a way to get up behind the house. It's pretty, kind of steep. When I was there was snow. When this happened, there wasn't. But there is a road up at the top of that hill at the back of the house. And, there are all those other homes around there. And then you've got the Sigma Chi house not far from the King Road house. So it's entirely possible. So, yeah.
Nice. A final comment here from Jamie Hoover, and then I'll get some final thoughts from you guys. And Troy, I'll throw this one to you. Another great show. Thanks, guys. In my honest opinion, I think that law enforcement knew as early as within 24 hours up to the first week, knew or was already on to who did this. And law enforcement had to see what I couldn't begin to imagine when they were all in there and found those poor kids, and they knew this was big, and they are just tightening up as much evidence as they can to get justice. And if I am correct, and they do know, you can bet the bank he's under heavy surveillance till they are cuffed up and out of our society. Like the way it goes in court, they only got one shot at this. Just a theory. Glad they told us they're speculating here. Happy holidays, everyone. We kind of had this comment earlier, but do you think there's any way police could have known that early on and are sitting on this potential suspect doing surveillance?
I would say it's doubtful, but that's a little speculative to say whether or not they know or not. I'm kind of the same opinion. I would hope that they're narrowing down a list. But I highly doubt that they knew exactly who it was that soon. Because if they knew that soon, it seems like they would have a significant amount of evidence on that person in order to know that soon and to know for sure. So I don't think that they know for sure. I think that they might have some guesses. That's my personal opinion, is they might have some guesses. They may have a list they're narrowing down, but I would say almost without a doubt they don't know exactly who this is at this point.
And Angenette, final word from you. Where does your reporting take you next with regards to this case?
I just think we have to keep at it and keep our ear to the ground and see if there's anything going on. I'm waiting for, I think I saw that 50 search warrants or something like that have been executed in this case. And, that could be for phones, social media accounts, things like that. But I really want to know, and I tried to get information about those search warrants. I called the courts and they won't give you anything. So those things are sealed, the search warrants and the affidavits. So, I think we just have to keep at it and keep an eye on it. I would love it to hear that they're executing a search warrant at somebody's property because they, think something's going on, or they found the Elantra and talked to the people in the Elantra. Even if they find the Elantra, maybe they'll tell us if they find the Elantra, maybe they won't. Who knows? Because they say they're confident these people or persons or people have information that were in the vehicle, but do we really know? We just don't know.
And do you have any plans to go back and do reporting from the ground there?
It's always a possibility. I was asked about that the other day by one of the powers that be, do you think we should send you back? So I can't say. Stay tuned, right?
We will keep our eyes and ears on law and crime. And, Roy, to you, first of all, the resilience of Idahoans, what is it like, and any final thoughts?
I would say the resilience of Idahoans is we bounce back from stuff like this. We have had tragedies happen before, and we bounce back from them, and we just rise again and go forward. But resolution is a big thing, and I think that Idahoans are tenacious as well. And all the people that I know in the state police and their investigations department are people who are like a bulldog with a bone. They're not going to let it go until they have this solved. And so I would be with them in saying that we're confident that whoever did this is going to get caught at some point. We're going to get some resolution, and we're going to move forward.
The woman with the beautiful bricks behind her is Angenette Levy, a correspondent and host for the Law and Crime Network. She's covered a lot of high-profile criminal cases, including the Steve Avery one that was all over Netflix. I heard you mentioned a podcast. You host a podcast on Law and Crime, Angenette?
Yeah, it's called Law and Crime Sidebar. We cover this. We've been covering it almost every day. So we try to bring people really smart analysis and the latest news about the case. It's a interesting. We really enjoy putting on the podcast. So I urge everybody to check it out. You too, Joel and Troy. So hope you check it out.
Please do check out Sidebar and Law and Crime, and maybe we'll come on as guests one of these days.
Oh my gosh, that'd be great. I'd love it.
And then you've got Troy Lambert, the man with the great goatee and beard going on, a freelance writer, mystery author. This guy studies killers because that's what he writes about. He also writes for Unbound Northwest. And of course, he is the author of the popular Max Boucher Murder Mystery series with 30 books published. I'm hoping to get one book about my mom published, but with 3 kids, we'll see if it ever happens. Thank you so much. You guys have been great. Love you, America.